Welcome, welcome. Thanks, y'all, again so much for joining us. This is our CER story session with Ronak and Rose and Abby and Allison as a part of our Faculty Fellows Program uh, enrichment series, co-learning, community building. We will welcome each of them to offer varyingly formal levels of presentation on their work and on their projects, their reflections on community engaged research and community engaged research principles. So we'll hear from each of them for about 10 minutes, however much time y'all want to take of that. They'll talk a little bit about each other, and then we'll have a Q&A period, which at this point will consist of Jonathan and SCoRE staff, which is great because SCoRE staff asks great questions. And we may, if we have more folks join us, then we'll have a little break to kind of welcome folks to introduce themselves. We'll do that anyway, so that Jonathan can say hey, and we can all remember who each other are.
Well, also you can all ask questions of each other, right?
Absolutely. So let me tell you a little bit about who's here because they're fab. Allison Mickle, I told y'all this would be brief, so please build on it when you present. Allison Mickle is the H. Bruce McEver Chair in Archaeological Science and Technologies. This is Allison's first spring at Georgia Tech, right, Allison?
That's right.
And we're so lucky she's here. Ronak Basu is an assistant professor in the School of City and Regional Planning. Ronak, it's also your first spring, or is it your second spring?
No, it's my second spring. I don't know if we can call this spring. This is the beginning of summer for me.
Yes, there we have it. So glad to have you. So please take note. We have a beautiful multidisciplinary tapestry emerging. Rose Santa Gonzalez is a research scientist. She serves as the community-centered AI deployment lead at AI Caring. And finally, Abby Stengel is assistant professor in the School of Industrial Design. I welcome y'all to go in the order in our little document that we created, which I think has Ronak first. Are y'all comfortable with that? Ronak, do you feel ready to go?
Sure. I wasn't aware I was first. I thought I was third, but again.
No. Oh, sorry, you're third. You're third.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My bad.
No?
My bad.
Okay. All right. Great. Let's follow the order. Yeah.
You're third. You're third. Okay. Rose is first. Abby is second. Ronak is third. Allison will wrap us up. Ronak, sorry for that false alarm. Okay. And we welcome you to the stage, Rose. We welcome you to your TEDx talk, my friend, to be shared to millions. Go forth and conquer.
So hello, everyone. My full name is Rosemarie Santa Gonzalez, but I go by Rose because it's shorter. The very mini quick add-on to my profile. So I am a research scientist too. I am currently hosted at the Institute for Robotics and Intelligent Machines Department and affiliated with AI Caring, the NSF AI Institute. My first time around in Georgia Tech, I actually arrived as a postdoc. And during my postdoc years, I got to interact with two different NSF AI institutes, one for advances in optimization and another one for democratizing AI. So within that collaboration, we set out to work with communities. And one of these communities in the agricultural spectrum was Native American nations. So that's one of the communities that I want to talk about today and share a little bit about the experience. When we started off, right, the two institutes very excited. We're going to work on supply chains. We're going to make things better. We noticed that there was some hesitation from the communities, right? Because if you come with your researcher hat of we know what we're doing, like sit back, relax, we're going to take it over from here, things don't tend to work as well as they could or they should. So we had to take 10 steps back right? And start talking to the community and interacting with them as people, right? Connecting at the human level, trying to understand what are the pain points, what things can we actually improve with AI in this case. Remember, there are two AI institutes, so we wanted to leverage AI to improve operations and improve the human condition. And through a series of interacting, again, more at the human level, right? We connected with the community, had various exchanges with the different elders and with other stakeholders. So in addition to the Native American nations, there are programs like USDA. So the Department of Agriculture, they also have some resources destined to ensure that the food gets across every member of the Native American nation. And we also started speaking to elders. After that, we got invited into one of their events for agricultural producers. And during that time, I tried to remove any conception of me being a research scientist or a postdoc. And I just connected in terms of I love plants. So I got rolled up my sleeves and helped them weed out the tomatoes. And we started talking about cucumbers. And from there, we also started talking about what are the problems in the sense of where is it that we need to get more tools or techniques to improve how we distribute food to people. And throughout conversations, I got to also understand what is the hesitation behind adopting AI. There's the data sovereignty question. There's the years and years of mistreatment, right? And reputation that academics had gained, especially with that community of just going, getting the data, goodbye, thank you so much, and publishing their papers. And so there was this building of the relationship and continuous improvement, and also explaining and translating what is it that mathematically I'm doing with all the algorithms and letting them actually play with the tools. So that's one part of it. The other part that I wanted to talk a little bit about, so now in my current role as a research scientist at AI Caring, I get to lead this deployment of interactive technologies in a senior community. So in this senior community, it was already pre-identified before I came into the team. They knew the community they wanted to work with. They had already established partnership with some of the staff of the independent living facilities, but we still weren't there with gaining the trust of the different seniors that we wanted to work with. So it has been a labor of love, again, honing into the being a person and connecting first at the human level, understanding what are the different pain points, what is it that we can actually leverage with the techniques and the technology that we come in with, and listening to them. And as we're listening to them, we go into this stage of co-designing. So technologies that we already thought, okay, they're going to have a conversational agent so that they can interact in their day-to-day and it can remind them to drink water, turned into they probably don't want to be reminded to drink water every 15 minutes, but they would like to have some conversations, search for things on the internet, and get reminded about the activities in the community. And that's where we pulled into the calendar of the community. So once you start having this relationship on equal footing, right, and exchanging with them at the human level, you get insights that otherwise you would have completely missed. And that actually helps you improve the technology. So I'm going to keep it sweet and simple, just with those two examples. And I'll pass it on to the next one.
Thank
Great.
you, Rose.
Thank you, Rose. This is Abby. I love that, getting down and gritty, and being willing to kind of put yourself in the middle of it, whether that's, digging dirt or helping somebody put together, put up a bar in their bathroom so they don't fall while they're in their shower. I think that's really important. And the reason why I bring that example up is that I'm an accessibility researcher in the the School of Industrial Design, College of Design. And I want to kind of take a step back and say, my training as a kind of community engaged researcher really began early on. I studied landscape architecture, but even after the first year, I just thought this studio work, even though it was so engaged, it wasn't engaged enough. And so I went and was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, focused on how to build capacity within community organizations. And then during my master's, was a Rotary International Scholar and centered a lot on clean water systems and clean cook stoves in Peru. And I wanted to share a few kind of fail fares because I think, we talk a lot about what is success, but also what does it mean to kind of fail and what does it mean? How do you recover as a somebody who's really wanting to be there for the right reasons, but maybe not having taken the steps and following kind of the principles that we have laid out. One example, I was living up in Alaska, and I was working with this Inuit, a Tlingit community, and I was invited to come to their board meetings. And I had just come through a training on how to, write objectives and goals, and I was invited to this, planning meeting. And I thought that my structure was so good. And I just remember coming in and trying to impose that upon them. And just that chill in the room, right? When you kind of feel like, oh wait, you don't really know what boundary you're stepping over until you have done that. And what does it mean to recover? How do you recognize that? How do you bring that to the surface and make amends as soon as possible? I think that that's really important. And just remembering, having grace with ourselves and remembering that we're always learning and kind of trying to kind of show up in that way. So I think that kind of mimics, Rose, what you were saying. But the projects that I wanted to kind of share about here at Georgia Tech have to do with my work. In the the School of Industrial Design, we've not had a PhD program. Actually, we just got it approved yesterday. So that's been a huge effort. But that's meant that kind of from infrastructurally, I've had both this freedom to think about, well, how do I actually do research, community-based, community-engaged research through my classes, right? And what are the opportunities, but also challenges of doing that, kind of bootstrapping it, right? So how do you really form authentic relationships that the students will also then kind of build up? And then from that seed, you can start to form proposals where you have that lived experience, you've built that trust in with one another through being on the ground. And, I really have appreciated actually the community agreement, the scope of work that SCoRE has put together, because in the last few years, it gives you this kind of safe space between not going and having an IRB for co-design, but really thinking about, well, how do you actually co-design the project briefs together? How do you bring them in, community partners in from the outset? And, my work has a lot to do with involving people who are blind, specifically in the design of tactile learning materials, but also thinking about all industrial design products. How do we actually, reinvent our design education, not just to be visually first, but to think about kind of what are these new paradigms for designing from a touch first perspective or an audio first perspective. And I think the lesson learned here is just to, I've brought my co-designers in as kind of co-instructors where they're involved, and we received a Center for Teaching and Learning grant to support that engagement. But again, just if as you're doing this, just to keep in mind, the administration sometimes moves a bit slower than for compensation, things like that, than the speed of the class and the speed of the conversations that we want to amplify. And so I think that that's an interesting tension that it might be nice for us to talk about, is in terms of, there might be some intrinsic value and some mutual benefit that everybody sees, but how do you really define that clearly from the outset, especially when it's experimental and you're using these projects as a pilot for what could become more substantial research and engagement over time. And I think the last thing I'll say is that I've been really grateful for the partners at Georgia Tech in terms of I've been able to I was able to put on a workshop and bring 30 people from all over the world for a workshop, and merge that with an art opening at the Paper Museum, as well as launching a community of practice, and thinking about how do we actually layer, how do we leverage each other's interests in ways that really highlight the unique capacities, but the shared mission. So I'm happy to talk more about that, as well as some work that I'm doing with civil engineering in terms of thinking about workforce development and how do we bring together mentors, community job seekers, but then also Georgia Tech students together to form these kind of investigatory teams. So I think one of my mentors once said, the messier the organizational chart, the better, because that means that everybody's involved from the beginning, right? Everybody has a shared stake in the work, and so we have to do that responsibly. But that's one of the tenets that I kind of love to go back to. So really happy to be here with you guys and look forward to chatting more.
Thank you so much, Abby. That was wonderful. Okay, take it away, Ronak.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me and sharing this space for me to share a little bit about my work. So I have a background in transportation, both engineering and planning. Like to call myself a plan engineer, and essentially my life goal is to figure out ways in which we can reduce auto dependence. So we want to get away from a society that forces people to use cars. We want to provide equally viable alternative modes of transportation. We want to provide people with choices, and in many parts of the world, that unfortunately is not the case. It plays out differently, of course. In the US, we see much more auto-dependent societies. Just because of how the land use and the built environment have been shaped over many decades. In many other countries, especially in the global south where I grew up, the story plays out in a different manner, where people may not be able to afford a car, and that's viewed as a luxury or a status symbol. And people have different sorts of challenges in all kinds of contexts, and I do a lot of comparative work across different countries, across different contexts. So I've had the fortune of being able to work with partners in many different countries. I've stayed there, worked on the ground, and I wanted to share two examples of that work. The first one was when the first project is when I was working at the World Bank. I was in the DC headquarters working on transportation in the LAC unit. So LAC stands for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we were looking at this town in Brazil called Belo Horizonte, and the World Bank wanted to invest in improving connections to the public transit system over there. So we had largely lower income communities living in the periphery, which is very different from what you'd expect in the US, of the town. And they had to take first a feeder bus to connect to the main or the trunk line, and then they would take another bus to get to downtown, which is where all the jobs were concentrated. And that would result in a commute of close to 2 hours, and that's just one way. So they're spending roughly 4 hours just traveling every single day, and the World Bank was wanted to invest in making that commute a little bit easier, especially for the feeder line, where often when people were coming back from work, it would get pretty late in the evening, around 8 or 8:30, and there were women who would feel unsafe waiting at the bus stop. So one of the proposals was to think about a sort of shared shuttle service with community champions and so on. So there would be like a WhatsApp group, and you could coordinate that. That would be operated by a third-party vendor. But then that was the vision, and my task there was to assess the feasibility of that, sketch a roadmap for how we would plan this and how this would be implemented. So I read all the reports I could. I dug into the data sets that were available, made all the maps that could be made in the first week that I was there. And I was having lunch with my manager, and I said, yeah, I think I'm kind of done, and I don't know how to go forward from here. And he was like, what do you want to do next? I said, I think it would be very, very valuable to go there and be on the ground. But I'm not sure if that's something we we have the budget for. And he said, you have 3 days to learn Portuguese, and we'll arrange for the visa. Don't worry. So you're flying to Brazil next week, and that was a lunch on a Friday. Apparently, when you work at the World Bank, things move much faster in terms of immigration. So yes, the visa did come through in less than 3 days. That's no longer the case now. Now I'm not an employee there. And I downloaded Duolingo and I hopped on a flight, and I was in Belo Horizonte in 3 days. And there, that's when I think, like, once you're on the ground and you're essentially an outsider to the community, that's a very different sort of experience. Even if you come in with good intentions, even if you know that you're representing this organization that really wants to invest in improving the community, of course, people aren't really going to open up to you. And of course, there was a language barrier. I mean, Duolingo can only do so much. And I'm not the fastest of learners anyway. So it was a formative learning experience for me. I had to first build trust. I had to engage with local agencies and organizations who were already doing a lot of work in the area on somewhat similar topics. And then they helped me gain a foothold, so to speak, build trust, and connected me with community members. And we did some informal data collection, which helped me understand what some of the challenges were, which would, of course, inform the design of the program. So, and then I came back after a couple of months. Also, as a side note, living in a hotel for 2 months is not great. Would recommend Airbnb. Hotels get lonely. And also, it's just a weird ecosystem where it's a dead room. It doesn't really have flowers or plants or anything like that. Airbnbs are much nicer. But anyway, so yes, came back, wrote up a plan, and later on, after I concluded my position there, I learned that yes, the World Bank did go ahead and make that investment, and now things are different on the ground. So that felt good, that I contributed in some way to that. The second experience I want to share with you is when I was working in the public sector again, at the Boston Region MPO, which is a regional transportation planning agency. And we were awarded a seed grant to think about how we would construct a community car sharing pilot. And there are car sharing programs out there. The most famous one is Zipcar. Most of the, if not all of the car sharing programs operate at market rate, so to speak. So you do get subsidies at times if you qualify for, let's say, income-based subsidies. But again, these are market-based programs. Some of them have electric vehicles. More are jumping onto the bandwagon. So our idea was, all right, let's try to max out the sustainability, so to speak. We want electric vehicles. We want this sort of car sharing program because it reduces the number of cars that people need to use. It's not one car per person. You're sharing this. But then how do we bring in the community aspect? And also, how do we go beyond that sort of just income-based subsidy? How do we make this accessible for the people who would benefit the most from having access to a car? So yes, we all recognize and agree that we want to be encouraging more people to use transit, to walk and to bike. But unfortunately, in the US, there are very few places that you can do that for the majority of your trips. And even then, even in the best of places, even in Boston, even in New York, there'll be some trips that you simply cannot do if you don't have access to a car. So we wanted to offer that additional option to folks who may not be able to afford cars. So the idea was to work with affordable housing locations and see if we could site the cars over there, if we could have the cars like parked in the garage at a handful of affordable housing sites, working with the developers, working with the residents, so that this would not be available to the entire public. This would be available only to the residents of that building. So it's really kind of like a shared amenity or resource, and the community comes together to take care of the car. And then something we heard a lot about was like, oh, whenever we use a public resource, people don't really take care of it. It's dirty. You have like cigarettes and food and so on in the vehicles. And like we just wanted to, we heard from the community, and that was one of the things we emphasized in our messaging. Like, this is your vehicle, and like we should be aiming to leave this in the condition that we received it in, if not better. So that was also, I would say, one of my formative learning experiences, where just spending time talking to residents. At times, some of them simply did not see the value in this program. They were like, I have my own car. Why should I give that up for this shared car, which may not be available when I need it? So in many ways, I had to be creative in my communication and trying to convince folks that, yeah, this is worth trying out. Don't knock it until you use it. That sort of thing. And we wrote up the follow-up application for an implementation grant. We just had a planning grant at the beginning that supported some of these activities. We did not get the implementation grant, unfortunately. But again, the experiences that I had were amazing. And these are not experiences you can get as a conventional researcher or in the classroom. These come about in many, many different ways. These, at times, like the first example, I think we have to jump in and take that brave dive into the pool. And like, yeah, I want this. I want to do something more than what's written in my job description. I really want to do something that I think would be valuable for the project. So yeah, so those are my two stories.
Thank you so much, Ronak. It's fantastic. We have so much we can talk about. Allison, the mic is yours.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and thanks everyone. I've really enjoyed listening to all of your experiences and stories, highs and lows and lessons learned. So I'm happy and eager to add my own. So I work, I'm an archaeologist, as Ruthie said, a while ago. I'll just remind everyone. And I work in Petra, Jordan, which, if you don't know it, it's a UNESCO heritage site where in 1985, as part of the World Heritage Site Management Planning Program, the Bedouins who live in this area historically were removed and displaced and put into government housing near the site. And so thinking about the principles for community engaged research, I think being aware of that and thinking about how people being moved out of their ancestral homes creates creates this disconnection and sense of place, and any work we do has to happen with an awareness of that historical harm that was done to the communities that still live in the area and still work in the area. So I've been working in Jordan since about 2010. And I identify as a community archaeologist, which means that my interest is always in how the tools and technologies and approaches of archaeology can serve the communities that are alive and there today. Interesting. Why isn't this loading? Okay. And so when you talk to the people who live in Petra, they will emphasize that them having lived there for as long as they did is actually why the site is in as good condition as it is today. And so thinking about that context where they've been displaced from the caves and tombs that they lived in, when you talk to people, they'll emphasize that they weren't. Some people are resistant to feeling like they were taken advantage of, and so I hesitate to frame it as just totally a violent displacement, because some people will emphasize the ways that their community negotiated the terms of that move. But one fairly universal sense among the communities that live there is that when they were in the area, they were the ones protecting the archaeological remains. And so I've always wanted to take that idea really seriously. That runs counter to traditional archaeological and conservation narratives and lenses on the presence of the Bedouin in the caves and tombs that have historically focused on the modifications they've made to those caves and tombs to make them livable, and thinking about the ways that like installing plumbing or plastering the walls, lighting fires, harms the archaeological remains. I think it's important to recognize that the Bedouins don't really see it that way. They emphasize the ways that, like, actually their presence was important for the upkeep and protection of the archaeological territory. So again, thinking about the principles, I think it's really important to think about people's presence not as inherently a threat. I mean, certainly we can recognize the ways that habitation of the caves and tombs impacts the archaeological remains. But I think recognizing that the people themselves see themselves as part of that landscape, part of that history, and part of its its protection is an important consideration. If you okay, another one is not loading. This is so strange. If you talk to the people who live in the area today, again, taking seriously that idea of asset-based approaches, you will notice that people feel very strongly connected to the history of goat herding that characterizes the Bedouin like subsistence economy and has for centuries. And the goat herding is important both as an economic practice, but also as a cultural practice. It's important to how people relate to the landscape. And so, yeah, people talk a lot about their goats and how much they care about their goats, how much they love their goats, but also how contemporary grocery stores and like the global sort of food industry, the availability of cow milk and other sorts of meat that you can buy from the grocery store, that's all threatening this historical practice of goat herding. When you spend time with goat herders, something that you will notice is that they will harvest the milk from the goats. They will make first butter from the goat milk, then they will make yogurt. And then there is this product that in Arabic is called meat. I think it's called whey in English. And that product gets thrown away. When you talk to people about their sort of like wisdom around goat herding, they will share that the ground where you throw away the meat, the whey, will get really hard. It'll get like really compacted, and you want to be careful where you throw it away because if you want to dig into that later to put up a tent or put up a pen for your goats, it'll be hard to dig into later. So you want to be careful about where you throw away this whey product, this meat. In Petra, okay, I don't know why these photos, okay, we're gonna abandon the slides, I guess. So weird.
They were loaded.
They were
We
loading?
saw.
Really? On my side, they were not. It was just a blank screen. That's so weird. Okay.
We could see the image of the way or the
Yeah,
anyway.
that was loading, but the other ones, it wasn't just a blank screen.
I think it just is. I don't think you should give up because the pictures are amazing, but maybe just talk over the loading screen.
Okay.
I know.
I don't know why. Well, okay. You know what we'll do? Yeah, it says this picture can't be displayed. Okay. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Well, we'll pull it back up, I guess. Yeah, okay. What if anyway, so one of the problems in Petra is that the sandstone remains of the archaeological site are constantly crumbling and fracturing. The tomb facades will come down. Things are eroding all of the time. And sandstone is basically just really compacted sand. And so for us, this story that that the meese was hardening up the sand was maybe a clue and provided some inspiration that if we could demonstrate that indeed this meese hardens up the sand and binds it together, that it could be turned into a consolidant, which is a conservation industry term for binding together the sandstone of Petra, preventing against erosion, preventing against fractures and cracks, and really like helping to conserve Petra, which is a real challenge. I mean, this is like I could pull up a slide of the books and articles that have been written about how hard it is to conserve Petra sandstone because it is, not really stone. It's like just it like blows away over time and washes away over time. And so we did an experiment where we worked closely. Yeah, why can't these photos load? They were working. I tested them before this. We did an experiment where we
We're
spent
not
time
seeing
with.
your thing at all now. I think you
I
need to
know, I
reshoot.
gave up on
Oh,
it. Yeah, yeah. Um, we did an experiment where we worked with a family to harvest the goat milk and we processed the butter, we processed the yogurt with them. We extracted the meats. We created a few different solutions of it. Maybe this one will work. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna try this one. We extracted the meats. We mixed it with a few other different substrates because it is an organic material, and we did learn the hard way that it will mold and ferment and explode if you don't mix it with other things that will keep it stable and prevent some organic processes from happening. And so we created basically different solutions of consolidants that we could use on Petra's sandstone. My students then participated in a collaborative experiment where we took blocks of different types of sandstone from Petra, soaked them in this mise, and we sent it off to laboratory testing in Jordan to see if it made the sandstone stronger by different metrics that we tested. I will be honest that the results have been inconclusive so far. There's some promising directions forward, but I don't want to mislead anyone and say that like we cracked it, we found, the key to conserving Petra for the future. But I'm hopeful about this experiment. We're going to keep working on it because goat herding is really like this cherished industry in Petra. We take the traditional knowledge that the community has shared really seriously, and if this is successful, like it stands to help the communities that we work with by creating an economically viable product out of what is currently a waste product of the goat herding industry, and also to address what is very much like not even arguably very much the key conservation challenge at Petra, this UNESCO World Heritage Site, the second biggest driver of the economy for the country of Jordan. It just feels like the potential is really there to serve a lot of interests at once. Because right now our only consolidant that we can really use is imported from Europe. It's really expensive and it's synthetic and it leaches chemicals into the local environment that we could avoid if we are able to find a solution using goat milk. So I think this resonates with Rose, the story that you shared about how like working with the community and listening to the community can actually improve the technology and sort of that recursive cycle that we can make possible when we engage in community engaged strategies. So thanks so much for bearing with me. Sorry about the photo snafu. Ruth, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. First time on Zoom. That was so wonderful, y'all. Thank you. We and Allison, those photos were fantastic. We have some time to chat. I would love to just ask each of you to share a little bit about what, and you did this very organically too, which is beautiful, but to go in order again and just share something that struck you that one of your colleagues said that you'd like to build on a little or just raise as a question or lift up for us. So I'm going to ask you to do that first, Rose.
I think like something that I'm also still thinking about, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Please correct me if not. Ronak, like you were talking about like going there to Brazil. So it raised the question of, okay, so then you were doing that from the US and then had to go there. And I wonder, like, how was that experience of interacting with people where perhaps their language is not your first language, or even coming and as humans, we all have our own experiences and biases. So yeah, that was my first reaction that we've interacted with people from our same communities, but we also interact with people that have totally different experiences and totally different languages, and how we reconciliate, right, with that as researchers and scientists and bring it also into our work. So yeah, I don't know if this is like also ask. So I'm also going to throw in the question of like, I would love to know more about like how that impacted the whole experience and the result of it.
Yeah, I thought that I was not making a whole lot of inroads at the beginning. And it was a very slow start because I didn't know anyone. So that was another thing that I was essentially just thrown in the deep end, and I had to figure my way out on the ground. So I started thinking, all right, who could I possibly reach out to who might serve as, like a guiding light, if you will. So reached out to the public transport authority, the local planning agency, the university, and they were also did work on transportation. So we were able to come together relatively quickly, and then of course they helped plug me into their networks and made a lot of introductions and so on, which is why I was there for a little over 2 months. Because if you think about, okay, this is why you're here, to gather a community and to help shape this sort of blueprint, right? Because I would not be involved in the implementation. That's the World Bank working with the local agencies. But my uh, the task that I was given was to come up with this blueprint. So that should not have taken 2 months, but it did because I needed time to become familiar with the context. I was I was using a language that was, yeah, not even my second language, probably the that was my fifth language. So it was, yeah, it was very challenging at the beginning, and it's humbling in many ways. And for some reason, I also found that when I mentioned that I worked at the World Bank, that seemed to open a lot of doors than just me saying like, "Hey, this is what I'm working on, and I'd love to talk to you about this." So yeah, large institutions do tend to hold some sway and can open doors. And being at Georgia Tech as well is, I think, a privilege in many ways. But I try not to use that in whenever I talk to other people, because I'd rather build connections based on like shared interests and goals and values rather than, oh, you're from Georgia Tech. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rose and Ronak. Abby, is there anything you want to lift up or
Yeah,
found?
totally. It's all really interesting. Ronak, I want to kind of point to something you said and maybe open up this conversation. You had mentioned that, when you're, in the field, quote unquote, part of that was the endurance of, living out of a hotel for 2 months, right? And I think, there have been multiple times where, I had felt that I kind of pushed myself beyond my own comfort zone, and remember having this realization that, my own sense of sustainability has to be met before kind of compromising, you know, at a deeper level to be there with community. And so I love that example. And, in accessibility research, we talk about, anticipating and adjusting. And there's also, in our field, like, the idea of access work or care work or There's a nice body of literature on the emotional labor of working with, more hard to reach populations. And um, so I'm kind of curious if, how Allison and Rosemary, you've also kind of found solutions or kind of moments that you kind of found that you were overextended. Because it's brave, awesome work to be doing what we're doing.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, Allison, do you want to follow that? Or either respond to what Abby's kind of offering as a connection to your own work, um, emotional labor of working with hard to reach populations. And I think, like Abby, you're also gesturing at kind of these different modes of translation, and what it requires, like both intellectually, but also like personally. Um, and yeah, go ahead, Abby.
And I'm happy to share my own kind of personal example
Please.
if that's helpful. Um, again, I think just in my work specifically with the blind community, um, it's a lot of relationship building and it's a really tight community. And, there's a lot of different perspectives about, how do you communicate about blindness or disability? Is it people first or is it identity first? And, blind people are not just one person, right? We are diverse. And so, I remember being with the director of Independence Training Center that I had spent a lot of time, working in the art room and getting to know them and to do my PhD dissertation work, for example. And we went to dinner afterwards with the director, and I just remember saying, oh, blind people, or, people who are blind, and she just said, "We are blind people," and it was like, whoa, it's like I was trying to be so cautious, but um it it took a lot of time to kind of figure out what my role was, or like how to kind of justify why I was also becoming interested in this kind of non-visual experience. I have lots of anecdotes, but yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
oh,
I couldn't tell who that was. So, Rose, you go ahead.
no, I already spoke, so I'll see.
Okay, Allison, go.
Um, uh, well, I don't want to, I don't want to take us off course. Rose, what were you gonna say?
We're doing that thing of you go first, you go first. I was just gonna say that the identity piece that reminded me of the seniors, working with seniors. And in the literature and in research, we refer to seniors as older adults. And that's also something that they reacted not very great to. They don't like to be called old. And they corrected me, and it was just a conversation where they told me, "Don't call us old. We're not old, we're seniors." And it was like very striking. So yeah, I was just gonna mention that. That also came up. Sorry, Alan.
No, no need to apologize. Yeah, Abby, I think I don't know if this resonates for you or for anyone else on the call, but I think I was thinking about like I mean, what you were saying, I sort of alluded to this in my presentation that I still struggle in my writing and my presentations to talk about the event of the displacement for the Bedouin community because I've met people. I mean, it is not strategic to downplay that displacement. Like it's important to the Bedouins to get the services and justice and rights that they need to make clear that that was an act of harm and violence. But it is also important to them that they don't seem like victims in that story, or important to some people that they don't seem like victims in that story. And yet, like a lot of the resources that they have had access to or get access to like relies on a narrative of victimization. And so I struggle a lot still. I mean, you could see it in my presentation. I feel the need to acknowledge that this community is not a monolith. And the way that I'm talking about that displacement event, there will be people who I mean, I've been told sort of aggressively by some members like that it was their decision to leave and they negotiated the terms by which they got exclusive access to like retail and donkey and camel running in Petra, like that they negotiated those terms. And they will acknowledge often that like the deal has been backslid on a bit, but their agency in that story is really important. So I think like that sort of how you talk about people in general in ways that correspond to their identity, but also that don't downplay their power is important. But I was also thinking, I mean, related to this, the term of hard to reach populations is interesting because where I work is certainly like rural. It's not close to Atlanta. It's not close to Georgia Tech. But the communities that I work with have actually received quite a lot of like humanitarian and international attention, partly by virtue of being at a World Heritage Site. And there's a lot of strategic ways that the communities, I don't know, talk to different stakeholders and get access to different resources. They're dissatisfied with a lot of those resources, but I think it's also been important in my work to recognize that I am like one in a long line of people who are coming to help. I don't know if that resonates for you all. Abby, I think about like the blind community in particular being a community where, there are schools and there are nonprofits and there are organizations and like those exist. And some I'm sure are better than others. And certainly where I work, there is a sense that like researchers and like practitioners who come from abroad, a lot of them make promises. A lot of them come offering skills and offering help. But yeah, I'm also one in a long line of like disappointments as well. And so, yeah, I could talk about that more, but I don't know if that resonates for other people too, even if you come with good intentions to listen, you're not even the first one to say that you're coming to listen even. And you have to contend with like a history of disappointment and letdowns as well.
Thanks, Allison. I think I welcome Ronak, you to kind of join this theme in the dialogue, or offer up something that you heard that struck you, either connecting to your own experience or quite different from it.
I will. The thought just escaped my mind. This was something Rose mentioned, which in my mind, as soon as I heard it, I was like, yes, I have had the same experience. I'm just trying to recall what that was. This was in response to Abby's question. Rose, any chance you remember what you shared?
When responding to Abby about the reaction of how we call them, the seniors.
Oh, yes, exactly. These terms, these academic, very I would say like politically correct terms that especially I would say in our social circles and even in academic circles, we're always like tiptoeing around, and we're so afraid to slip up because everyone's going to immediately jump on you and judge you and criticize you. And even in transportation, yes, and in urban planning, we use this phrase, older adults. Used to be seniors when I was a student, and now I see older adults being widely used in the discourse. But we at times forget that we're describing a community, we're describing a population group, and they may not like the term that we're using for them. And again, that's something which is hard to understand if you're just knee deep in journals and papers and you're not really engaging with the communities whom you're supposedly working with, or worse, working on.
Thanks, Ronak.
I'm in an interesting position right now, currently, where I've been kind of straddling this line of being a researcher, but also a community member and a community advocate, and in planning, maybe an advocacy planner, right? Thinking about How do we kind of lift things up, but also figure out kind of what our role is in this process. And we've just kind of launched, we've just got an IRB approval, and with the project that I'm referring to, we've done a lot of groundwork, and I'm understanding a lot of the community dynamics, and but I just posted, a flyer announcement about the study on one of the Facebook groups, and there's so much suspicion in the community around some of the work that's happening that, that's tangential to what we're looking at, and we kind of have gotten pushed back from the issues that I really want to look at into looking at it from like a more distance or kind of more politically correct kind of approach, but still to try to get to some of those community voices and elevate them in ways that haven't been there. But I'm just reminded of, it's like, okay, well, I have to, now I have to stand up, right? Now I have to respond to those and say, I'm available for questions. Please let me know, and to almost be now claiming myself as part of the community a little bit more, or trying to figure out what's appropriate in that way. And I think that kind of boundary crossing, I think, is a really important part. And I think whether you're working for if you were working for, was it USAID or the World Health Organization, or you're we're coming in as faculty, I think each of these roles kind of carries those interesting boundaries.
These are amazing game highlights, y'all. I think we immediately went pretty deep, and I love it.
Can I say something in response to what Abby just said? Is that
Yes,
okay?
do.
Yeah, the call out to USAID and the WHO, Abby, like really resonated. I've been really struck in working in Jordan, seeing like there's a bunch of refugee organizations that have come in, especially since well, when the Syrian war was still ongoing and there was an influx of Syrian refugees. Jordan, of course, has a massive refugee population, and like a large part of the economy is the humanitarian sector. So you see these people come in and out, and it's been really striking to see the obligations, like, yeah, when your job is to be a humanitarian aid practitioner and to implement often like a short-term project where the whole goal is to infuse cash into an economy. The obligations and the sort of your ethical commitments are distinct from being a researcher, and it's been really striking to see and to interact with folks working in those areas, and to see areas where maybe our goals overlap, but our approaches diverge, or they don't seem as mired in maybe like the amount of like self-reflection and like self-analysis that I'm doing often in my role. And so I don't mean this as like a call out to that sector, but it is when you talk about like the role that you occupy, and I don't know, it really resonates with like the training that you come in with and your sense of your relationships, and yeah, and like the principles that are guiding you maybe are different even from others who share a very broad commitment to supporting or promoting, assisting, uplifting, whatever verb you choose, the community that you're working with. So yeah, that is really, that resonates for sure.
Can I add on really quickly just to say, like, that made me think a lot about, like, I'm not necessarily, I don't view myself as a computer scientist or like highly technical, even though I have a PhD in engineering and whatnot. But it's hard to not come in techno-deterministic sometimes. And there have been projects where it's like we had to shift so significantly to actually become educators, right? Or community educators, to make sure that there was that kind of established language to kind of reconcile. And I love that, like the ethical commitments, and how those start to inform how we're approaching things.
I wanted to jump in just to let Anna have a second to say hey to y'all. remind you who she is, and offer Anna anything that's popping up for you in the dialogue that you're hearing in the presentations.
Yeah. So as a reminder, my name is Anthony Santiago. I'm a community engagement specialist in the SCoRE office. And I've just been very excited to hear just the amount of, I guess, learning on both sides for community. And I think for all of you guys as faculty, I don't remember who made the comment that like, I'm going into a community, but I'm also learning. I think a lot of times when people do go out in the community, it's more of, like you guys said, we're researchers, we know it all, but I think you guys are not going in with that perspective, which is incredible and a nice breath of fresh air to hear. That it's a learning concept for everyone involved on both sides, which is really refreshing. I loved just listening to the perspectives. You guys, I mean, we're working in different areas of the world, which is so cool. But I think the common theme was just working with community and what you guys gain out of it. I did have a question, and anyone can answer. What I think is one lesson learned or something that you would do different based off your experience, or I guess where you are now? Like, had I known then, I would have done this differently. But yeah, I'm just curious because you guys all had very different experiences, but I think there was a very common theme. But I'm curious, just kind of learning concepts. What would you guys take away and say, yeah, I would do that differently next
Thanks, Anna.
time?
Anyone pop in for that?
I can think of something that I would totally do different, and this is also very much like on my side, and something that I struggle with even right now, and I'm trying to see how to do it differently. So for context, short story, my goal was to go into tenure track. It's still my goal to go into tenure track. To be in tenure track, you're measured by your publications. And during all of my community engaged research, I have focused a lot on the community and ensuring that my tools are actually used. And I have a myriad of examples of tools that were actually used in practice and that help the community. But when it comes to the researcher part or the faculty part, sometimes it's hard to communicate and convey why is it so important to have the publication. And going back to what Allison mentioned about the ethical part, right? I struggle a lot with that, especially when I work with minority groups that do not want them to be, referred to as a specific population or portrayed in a specific way, and trying to incorporate them into how I write about them, but also balancing the fact that our currency as researchers, academics, faculty is still the publications. So that's something that I'm still managing and trying to get better at so that I can not only help the communities, but also help myself staying in an academic environment where I can get the capability, right, and in the very big privilege of being able to work on different problems and help even students and faculty around me to connect with that community, but still producing that output. Like that's a big thing that I would like to do different, and that I am trying to find how to do different and how to communicate that impact. Maybe as academia needs to change so that we can measure that impact. But yeah, I'll leave it there because I can talk about that for a full hour.
Thank you. That's a tough one. I mean, that I think that definitely requires change from the top up, but what can be done meanwhile while that's being worked on? I think that the conundrum there, it's like, how can I be respectful of community and work alongside them while also advancing my career opportunities and getting where I'd like to be? Which is tough. And I don't have any answer for that.
Right. Right. I'm just thinking like how do we establish those kind of benchmarks within the cultures of our departments or organizations? But I mean there's so many contextual factors. I just wanted to say I just put a link in the chat. It looks like the last kind of convening of this group happened in 2019, but ethnographic terminalia. And I think this was a group that was really kind of pushing on some of these questions, especially like when you're going and doing long form, anthropologic ethnographic work. And, it's like your whole life, right? And it's like, you come back, but like how might you actually create these more kind of immersive ways of communicating what you experience? So Rose, that might be useful for you.
Abby, what a neat resource. Thank you so much. Abby, do you have anything that comes to your mind immediately as a lesson learned? You shared, I mean, I think you actually opened with a kind of cautionary, I came to this group, I had a plan, I felt the chill in the room.
Mm-hmm.
If there's other lessons learned for you.
Yeah, I think just like, the first thing that came to mind was just knowing the stakeholders, like really, doing your stakeholder kind of analysis and knowing kind of who are the stakeholders, but then also there's so many, yeah, the institutional knowledge or the communal knowledge that's kind of subsurface, and allowing ourselves time to also understand where those tensions are, and figuring out how to remain neutral. I remember I was working on a landmine reclamation project, and was at that stage kind of training to be a landscape architect, and was one of my mentors shared, that she never became, affiliated with organizations that had any real political ideology, so that she could always be coming in as a more neutral voice. I mean, I think that's harder and harder these days. And I think, um, again, something I'm grappling with is, you know, how to stand with having a distinct value-based perspective, and knowing that we can justify that in this scholarship, and, that we are also trying to tell these human stories. And I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. And I think, Rose, I've been kind of sitting in this space of not publishing, but really focusing on how to build relational capacity, just trusting that it's going to become something that my tenure case, will be appreciated for, but we'll see.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Abby. I want to say really quickly, I think this is very rich. I come from like training as an ethnographer, and these conversations are hard and important. As a facilitator, my mentor says you are value neutral and justice forward, which I think is interesting. Of course, none of us is value neutral, but the way that we enter, as you're saying, Abby, a context, the way that we best situate ourselves to advance what we understand to be community priorities, leveraging both institutional prestige and power in ways that are justice forward, in an era where the phrase justice forward, right, would be quite a red button phrase. I think you all are lifting up how tricky positionality is, and the ways that certainly the basics of language and creating a shared language are challenging. When I was interviewing folks about school desegregation, if I opened with the assumption that someone had trauma, right, from being the only Black student in a class, because I had read about what had happened to them, and then I talked to them immediately, Allison, to your point, that person would push back against the framing of being primarily a traumatized person and say, it wasn't that bad. I mean, I did it. My mom wanted me to do it, or I wanted to represent my family, and it was fine. Look at me now. So I think like both of the ways that we frame what questions we're asking and why we're asking them, and the ways that we offer and seed space to our interlocutors to say who they are, right? Rather, our saying who they are, is all super sensitive and critical. And then, Rose, to your point, right? Like when you represent your own work, if you're representing your work in ways that are most beneficial to the communities you work with, that may be not most beneficial to your career. And I think, working on that, getting your fingers in that, and hearing and working with your colleagues around how they've, done that is so interesting. So anyway, sorry, you guys, I didn't mean to didn't mean to get into my own stuff. But I love hearing from y'all about this. And Anna, thank you for the question. Ronak and Allison, what's coming up for y'all on lessons learned?
I don't know if I have a great story to share that's about something done wrong. Not because I've done everything right, but I think like I think if anything, I tend to move very slowly, and so I think yeah, it's hard to come up with something that like really went wrong. But I'm happy to share some critiques that I've certainly received and I think are fair. So my first project focused on Petra and Jordan was about the history of labor in archaeology and the ways that site workers have been employed on archaeological sites and the ways that their labor has been exploited. And the purpose of the book was really to demonstrate that site workers who often had like a third grade or eighth grade education, actually had a lot of expertise about archaeology that we were missing out on by the way that archaeological projects are structured and managed and the ways that labor is recruited, paid, and often like fired and stuff. And I think the book was effective. It did what it needed to do. And I since then have gotten questions and critiques about the degree to which that project and what has followed from it assumes that Jordanians are not educated and are don't have like technical and scientific expertise. And I'm choosing my words carefully because like it is just frankly true that the oral history interviews that I did were with people who, by and large, not 100%, but didn't have university education, and that was part of the purpose of the book. And I think that was an important contribution. I still stand by it. Sorry, Anna, not to give you a failure, but I do think that was like valuable and important. But I am hearing the critiques, and I'm trying my best to make sure that like moving forward, I'm not assuming that just because somebody is Jordanian that they occupy the same subject position of like the sort of like uh, site workers who have worked in like rural economies their entire lives, which is part of why in this project, which is really like it's a very collaborative project. I wouldn't say that I'm leading it by any means. It is honestly primarily being led by a startup organization that is based in Petra, made up of residents of the area. And so I'm sort of guiding like the sort of publication side of things more than anything. But that's why I sort of landed hard on the fact that we're using Jordanian laboratories. Certainly we have access to the testing facilities. We would need to do that here, but we would have to export Petra's sandstone. And we would be ignoring the like real material science and engineering expertise that exists within the country of Jordan. And so as an international researcher, I've definitely been reminded a number of times that the country of Jordan has academic and scientific expertise that my first book was not really focused on, and that my work runs the risk of ignoring that in the future. And so I am doing my best to guard against it, but I have gotten that critique certainly on like drafts of publications, and have done my best to adopt and adapt in response.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Ronak, how about you?
Not a whole lot to add beyond what I've already shared. I'll just say that for my work, because I work in transportation, there's this expectation that I work locally, and it is challenging because, first of all, like I didn't grow up in the US. And also, like every place is new to me. I do not have any social networks anywhere. So when I moved to Boston, which was the first place I landed in the US, it was hard to form those social and professional networks. It took a long time to establish those. And then when I moved to Atlanta from Boston, there is this expectation that yes, I'm going to solve Marta tomorrow. But yeah, it's a slow moving process. You cannot rush trust building. You cannot rush relationship building, and to see any meaningful change on the ground. And the transportation sector moves slowly anyway. It does take time. So yeah, maybe someday in 20 years, if we are all still in Atlanta, and Marta hasn't been fixed, you could blame me.
Thanks, Ronak. Wonderful. Anything else that you all want to offer, acknowledge, or lift up, or anything that you would like us to have as we depart into the rest of our days?
I'll just say I think it's so cool to have this conversation, and sometimes I feel like I'm like, am I being, hyper vigilant, or am I just being too lax? Like, what are these things that am I attending to all the things that I need to attend to? So it's nice to kind of be in this conversation and know that we can reach out to each other.
Great, Abby. And that's the most important takeaway, I think, is that you all are, incredibly wise, and I think have so much that you have learned, and you're very modest about it, but and your work intersects in these fascinating ways. I thought, Rose, do you want to add? I thought you were going to unmute, but maybe you're affirming. Okay, a head nod affirming. I love it. Allison, Ronak, Abby, Rose, thank you so much. I wish that your whole cohort of faculty fellows had been here for this conversation, but thankfully it's recorded. No doubt they'll choose to watch it and as their movie selection on this Friday night, because I'm going to send it out. And very grateful for your willingness to be in this kind of dialogue with each other and with us. I'll send notes out with the recording for y'all to use if you want. And also, as Jenny said, we'll get to hang out again in person in May. But in the meantime, if you, of course, want any one-on-one time with Jenny or me or Nicole, always let us know. And if you want to share any further thoughts on these themes, I would love to write with any of you. I would love to support you all writing together a multidisciplinary reflection on these questions. I think it's incredibly important to show how these themes pop up in engaged research in these very different fields. You are, leads and lights in this work. And so I think sharing it more broadly could be fascinating. I would be happy to find the right forum for that, or help find the right forum for a piece like that, help find the right length so that it wasn't a burden, right? Just like help us figure out what might be doable if there's interest. I see that, Rose. Excellent. So no pressure. Don't have to decide today. Nice, Abby. But I would love for us to contemplate that moving forward. Thank you all so much. Any unmuters for a final thought? Allison.
No, I was just saying thank you. Thank you, Ruthie, for convening this and for getting us organized and making this happen. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, my pleasure to be with you guys. Such a treat.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you. Have a great
everyone.
weekend.
Have a good Friday.
Happy Friday, y'all. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Weekend.